Let's talk about Bristol. It's a city known for its incredible culture, its creativity, but right now it's also a flashpoint for a huge problem facing cities everywhere, a rental market that's just broken. We're going to use Bristol as a kind of case study to unpack all the pressures, the numbers, and the really fierce debate about what on earth to do next. And the best place to start? Well, it's with the people who are living through it every single day.
Right. So, to really get a feel for what's going on, we're not going to start with spreadsheets or charts. We're going to start with the human experience, the kind of personal stories that often get buried under all the headlines.
Just take a moment to read this. This is from a nurse in Bristol. She has a good, stable job, a job our communities absolutely rely on, and yet almost half her entire paycheck is gone. Poof, just on rent. That's before she even thinks about electricity or council tax or food. I mean, that quote right there really gets to the very heart of the problem.
And you know what? Her story is not an exception. It's becoming the rule. Bristol is now officially one of the least affordable major cities in England if you don't count London. The struggle to just find a decent place you can actually afford, well, it's affecting everyone from all walks of life.
So you have to ask, how did it get this bad? Okay, now let's switch gears from the personal stories and look at the hard data, because the numbers really tell a pretty wild story.
So, over the last 10 years or so, the average wages in Bristol went up by 24%. Now, on its own, you might think, okay, that sounds pretty decent, right? But in that exact same time frame, the average cost of private rent shot up by 52%. That's more than double the pace of people's paychecks. You can already see the problem. And then there's this number. The average price to actually buy a house in Bristol, it soared by a staggering 93%. Just incredible. And when you put those three numbers side by side like this, you really see the massive gap. Look at that tiny bar for wage growth. It's just dwarfed by the jump in rent and then completely swamped by the cost of buying a home. This disconnect, this widening chasm, is what's fueling the whole crisis.
But here's the thing, this pressure isn't felt the same everywhere. This map shows how much rent is expected to go up for non-students in different neighborhoods. You can see how some areas have been hit way, way harder than others. It's creating these intense pockets of unaffordability all over the city.
Now, what's really interesting is if you look at the student housing market instead, the whole pattern just flips. Suddenly, different neighborhoods are feeling the squeeze. It just goes to show you how the city's huge student population creates this totally separate rental market with its own unique pressures.
Okay, so we've seen the numbers. Now let's dig into the people at the very center of it all. The landlords who are trying to make a living and the tenants who are just trying to find a home.
On one side of this, you've got a really professional industry. Award-winning letting agencies that manage big property portfolios. And their goal is to provide a smooth, efficient service for landlords. And, in an ideal world, for tenants too.
And then you hear something like this. This is a real experience from a tenant in Bristol. I mean, a garage with a chimney poked through the roof. The contrast between that professional, polished image and this grim reality for some people, it just shows you the massive difference in standards that can exist in the very same market.
So for a lot of tenants, the situation is incredibly stressful. You've got the constant worry of a no-fault eviction hanging over your head. You might be too scared to ask for repairs in case you get kicked out, and you're often forced into these crazy bidding wars just to secure a place to live. It's tough out there.
But at the same time, you have to look at the other side of the coin. Landlords are feeling squeezed too. Tax rules have gotten tougher, there's more and more regulation to deal with, and rising costs are eating into any profit. Because of all that, some landlords are just selling up, or they're switching to short-term holiday lets, which, you guessed it, shrinks the number of long-term homes available even more.
So all these competing pressures from both sides have pushed one really controversial idea right to the front of the conversation: rent control. So what are we actually talking about when we say rent control? Well, to put it simply, it's any kind of law that limits how much a landlord can raise the rent. It's not some crazy new idea. Big cities like Berlin and Barcelona have already brought in their own versions to try and tackle affordability.
So what would that actually look like in Bristol? This table helps make a really abstract idea pretty concrete. Let's say the city brought in a 5% rent cap. In a neighborhood like Bedminster, that would affect over half of all rental properties. But then you look over at Westbury on Trim, and it would impact less than a third. It just shows that a one-size-fits-all policy would land very differently depending on where you live.
And this really gets us to the heart of the whole debate. On one side, people say rent control gives tenants much-needed stability and helps keep neighborhoods affordable. But on the other side, the argument is that it could spook landlords, causing them to sell up, which would reduce the number of homes to rent and maybe even lead to poorer quality housing, since there's less incentive to invest in upkeep.
You know, when you zoom out from all the stats and the policy arguments, it all really points to a much bigger, more fundamental question for a city like Bristol.
Here's the great paradox of it all. Bristol's housing crisis is, in a strange way, a result of its own success. It is such a great, desirable place to live that the demand to be there is now pushing out the very people who made it so great in the first place: the nurses, the artists, the young families. And that leaves us with the ultimate challenge. And it's not just a question for Bristol, it's for cities all over the world. How do you possibly balance the powerful forces of the market with the simple, fundamental human need for a stable, affordable place to call home? Finding an answer to that is the tightrope that Bristol is trying to walk right now.